Hi there, salve. I'm Claudia Flisi, SciAS alumni and journalist in Italy. Today's interview, conducted by SciAS alumni Ishai Richetti, is with Professor Donald Jensen, Director of Russia and Strategic Stability at the United States Institute of Peace. Dr. Jensen is an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins and an associate fellow at the Germani Institute for Social Science and Strategic Studies in Rome. Dr. Jensen gives us his views of prospects and problems awaiting the Biden administration in this area of expertise. He sees both a U.S. pushback against Russian aggression and at the same time efforts to engage Russia on areas of mutual interest. He sees the U.S. more aligned with its Atlantic partners and with NATO. Also, possible areas of conflict with Italy if the U.S. perceives, as is likely, that Italy is becoming too soft with Russia. Lots of insights in this interview. Hope you enjoy it.
Recently, U.S. elections where Biden was appointed as president. Today, there was a ceremony of new president, Joe Biden. And curiously, actually, we noticed that the relationship between the U.S. and Russia was not mentioned. So we wanted to ask what do you think will change in the U.S.-Russia relationship with this new administration?
Sure. I something we talk about a lot here. I know some of the members of the Obama Russia team, so I can give you, I think, where I think it will go. And I would not put any importance on the fact that he didn't mention it in the speech today. That's just rhetoric. So what do I think? I think number one, the message will be more consistent, which is to say, we will more vocally and probably other ways oppose Russia's aggression in Europe and elsewhere. Number one. Number two, that will be a consistent message. I think sometimes in the past, the message wasn't always consistent. And number two, I think you're going to see at the same time an effort to talk to Russia on issues where there is cooperation possible. So you'll see toughness, but a willingness to talk where possible. And that, above all, will be on arms control and strategic stability and international security issues where there are disagreements, where there is a dangerously changing international security environment, which is to say the architecture of Cold War arms control, as you see in the so-called START treaty, is becoming out of date. There's all sorts of new weapons. We don't know how to control them or even understand the other side's intentions. And we have the rise of China as a global player as well. All of these things need to be talked about. As we say, the rules of the road need to be decided, even if we disagree on some things. So I think you will see very quickly in the next couple of weeks the U.S. decision to extend the Strategic Arms Treaty. That will buy time to talk about these other international security problems. And that, I think, will be a central focus of the U.S.-Russia relationship. At the same time, I think you're going to see a more verbal support and maybe even more support for Ukraine, support for the opposition in Belarus, and opposition to Russia's cyber attacks on Western countries. So engagement, as they say, talk where you can. They'll probably talk about COVID epidemic as well. But I think you're going to see a harder line toward Russia. I don't think sanctions will change that much, but I think you're going to see a much more effective, focused U.S. policy toward Russia. Deals can be made, understandings can be created, but I think that will be the major direction in which we're going.
Thank you. About Russia and European Union, there are many things at stakes. Comes me to my mind comes the Nord Stream 2 project and the Navalny problem. And about Nord Stream 2 project, also the US actually is coming and is dealing with it. How do you think that the relation between Russia and EU could
Sure. Well,
change?
let's talk about the big and go to the specific. I
And also about Italy,
Yes, that I
was
was going to
yeah.
put that in there. So, as always, the U.S. under Biden will try to work with the European Union, probably more closely than the previous administration. As always, we will see the European friends as our allies, even though sometimes we disagree. And I think you're probably going to see much more active involvement by Washington in climate change legislation, in working together to stop Russia's cyber attacks, that kind of thing. So, in that sense, it will resemble the Obama approach 4 years ago. And I think the NATO will be a key still of our approach and our strategy, and NATO will be strengthened, if anything. That having been said, I think there are a number of worrying signs that I think should give people pause. Number one, you said, is energy in Nord Stream 2. I think that ultimately, unfortunately, some version of Nord Stream 2 will be constructed, which will advance Russia's geostrategic interests. Number two, I think the change of the leadership in Germany to a possible Christian democratic successor to Chancellor Merkel is very worrying, because the candidate who's going to be the new party leader appears to be much more soft on Russia than I would like, than the U.S. I think would like. Number one. Number two, there are other weak parts of the European Union that need strengthening. And I have to say, Italy being one of the weakest. And you saw this week that Lavrov started to comment on the Italian political situation, which I thought was remarkable, because they don't usually do that, at the same time as the government is undergoing a crisis. And I watch, as I told you earlier, I watch Rai Italia every day. So I think Italy remains a weak link in the European Union, and that means it's a country that Russia will try to exploit for its own benefit. And but what is its own benefit? Nord Stream 2, getting relief on sanctions, using, if there's another migration crisis, using migration and Italians' concern about the migration crisis to weaken the European Union. And as you know, Italy went from being one of the most active supporters of the European Union in recent years to one of the biggest critics. And it's another discussion why that's the case. But I think Italy is going to be a prime target, as we saw from Lavrov this week. There was no condemnation that I saw of the Navalny arrest by the Italian government. Maybe there was, but I didn't see it.
No, there wasn't.
And everybody understands that Italy has economic problems, and everybody understands that medium and small businesses, which are the genius of Italian business, has lost customers because of the sanctions. But that's really the problem of Russian behavior. It's not the West's fault or the United Nations, European Union's fault. So I think, as much as Italy has over the past 6 years talked about opposing sanctions, which they do all the time, at the end of the day, they extended, they rolled over. And so Italy is again talking about, if we can breathe Lavrov, about their unhappiness with the sanctions. So we will see if Italy then vetoes the sanctions against Russia for its aggression in Ukraine the next time it comes up. I don't know. I'm hoping that it's just parlare, but we'll have to see.
About Italy and Russia, do you think that actually, as you mentioned, Italian government didn't seem to have comment on Navalny affair? Do you think this is a hint of something? This is an indication of something about?
Oh yes, I think it's an indication that they don't want to be too tough on Moscow. Absolutely, absolutely,
Okay.
and I don't like that. But we'll have to see if it goes beyond diplomatic statements, if it goes into action. And again, Italy has always had to an American, curious relationship with Moscow, even during the Cold War. Not entirely clear why, but I have some ideas, even as they're a very close friend of the United States. But I do not think the Biden administration will be pleased if Italy goes weak on the question of sanctions against Russia. So, if so, they're going to get pressure from Washington, I think.
About Russia and the Middle East, Russia is gaining much power in the Middle East. Do you think there's another actor that can contrast this power of Russia, or do you see Russia gaining more and more power in the Middle East, becoming the only or the major actor in the Middle East?
Well, I certainly think that you're probably going to see the U.S. try to regain some of the ground it lost, and I think that's going to be happening, and that probably will come with what I expect to be the Biden administration's attempt to reinstate the Iran nuclear agreement, for which they need Russian probably support. Israel, as you know, has had better relations with its Arab neighbors recently. I think that's a good sign. But I think it's going to be very hard for the Russians to push the Russians back to where they once were. And I think the U.S. is probably going to have to get used to dealing with Moscow there for the future, at least, even as we try to reduce their role. I'm trying to be careful here. In Syria, you're seeing a difference in Russian emphasis in their approach to Syria too, which is to say, they seem to be giving more attention to peace building, and they've won the war basically, and I think they want to settle the pot, let the sauce cool down a little bit now that they've made their point that they want to be a major player in the region. Relatedly to this question, if I could add, Ishai, is that Russia has become involved in a variety of countries at a very small level, but still involved with Wagner private army groups, with money, and they are now involved in Syria, Venezuela, Libya, an area Italy has a historic interest in, Central African Republic. They've talked about building a naval base in Africa. All of those things are troubling, and all of those things suggest that despite the fact that the Kremlin has had economic and other problems this year, they seem to be able to support still a pretty active level of troublemaking, if we can say, in various countries. That one more thing is the China relationship continues to evolve and apparently get closer. But I think at the end of the day, Russia will not want to be a junior partner of China. They will cooperate and work together when they can, and other times they will not. So I think we'll have to see.
Actually, as you mentioned, many European countries have interests in the Middle East, economic interest, energy interest. Do you think they will have the power to maintain those interests, or it will be very much?
Well, they're going to have to keep aware of the fact that Russia is now a major player, and that may make them want to move closer to Moscow's point of view on things. I'm very nervous sometimes, Ishai, to talk about Europe or the European Union I see Europe more regionally. The Central Europe, and the Baltic countries, which are very pro-American, very, with the exception of Hungary, very anti-Moscow. The richer, older European partners of the United States, Italy, Spain, and France, seem to be softer toward Moscow, but that may also reflect a signal they feel they're getting from Washington. We have to see. We have to see if Biden comes in and is tougher on Russia, how the European partners are going to respond. I do think, though, that it's also important to watch the level at which take that out, the level at which Biden engages with Russia. Is Russia going to be a top priority of the Biden administration or lower? And I think China will be almost certainly a higher priority of the Obama administration. And the Russians won't like that, because the Russians have said explicitly in recent weeks, we want to be taken seriously. We want to be taken seriously as a great power, or we'll make trouble. And I think part of the Russian calculation is that this is sort of a little blackmail. If we don't give them the dignity that they want, they're going to cause trouble. So that is a way to get Biden to talk to them more, but I think there are limits in what Biden can do with them, because the U.S. and Russia, especially as shown by Navalny this week, the U.S. and Russia have serious disagreements, and I don't think those can be softened significantly anytime soon.
Well, you talk about Central and Eastern European opposed to Southern Western European, like Italy, France, but I don't know. Just asking, how much do you think it's important, the Cold War in this division, like many Eastern European countries where Russia satellite states during the Cold War? Is that something that weighs
absolutely.
much?
I think absolutely the level of anti-Europeanness, anti-Russianness in those countries other than Hungary is very, very strong. And I think I tend to agree with them in my own writing. And I think they have some lessons that they could teach Macron or Conte or whoever it might be. And the British really are finding their own way now. So I think we ought to pay attention to them. I think the Biden people will. But it's again, as Vice President Cheney once said, it's old Europe that I think sometimes causes more worries than some of the smaller countries to the east. So again, you're going to see an administration that's very globalist, that's very Atlanticist, that will work to strengthen NATO and the European Union. But you cannot just turn the channel back on the last 4 years. Some of the things that President Trump did were very good, many things, and he did strengthen NATO and so forth. But Trump preferred bilateral relationships, Poland, U.S., for example, more than the Obama people probably will. They will probably prefer to act multilaterally on climate change or NATO or whatever the issue might be. What the Russians do in all this, we'll have to wait and see, because they're very good at assessing situations tactically and then trying to exploit weakness that they see. And I think that's what they're doing with Italy right now, frankly.
Okay. Thank you, Director Jensen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.